This is Madia-as Digdigan Buenaflor, extending an invitation to each and every one of you everywhere, as my way of commemorating the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. I will read and serialize my novel, The Blood of Three, starting on Tuesday, August 27, and continuing episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Follow the drama on my YouTube channel. May we forever exhale and inhale love and peace. Chapter 19. A top-secret conference was immediately conducted in the hut of Colonel Holt as soon as Ernesto arrived in the camp. The colonel had undergone the greatest tension and anxiety from the moment Ernesto left the camp until he arrived. Colonel Holt did not hide the urgency to hear Ernesto's report even before he could settle down in his seat. "You got the sketch, Captain Duran?" "Yes, sir. Here it is." There was both reassurance and quiet pride in Ernesto's face as he handed the paper to the colonel. Without wasting any time, the colonel unfolded the paper and put it flat on the desk before him. Without blinking an eye, he studied it carefully, implanting every detail into his mind. Something magical happened. The lines on his forehead, which had deepened by the anxiety of the long wait, gradually relaxed and disappeared. He looked up at Ernesto, a smile tightening his lips. A sigh of relief was heard as he inhaled and released the air from his chest. "This is just perfect, Captain. Congratulations." The colonel was not fond of long-winded praises, and Ernesto knew that everything in Colonel Holt's heart was said in that one short line. Ernesto smiled as his heart was filled with pride for the heroic deed of his girl. The colonel looked down at the sketch. "We will launch a real surprise attack on the superior manpower of this bastion." He spoke with resolute confidence. "Getting into the armory," he continued, pointing at the catacomb with his fingers, "will shorten the fight. We will overpower the enemies with their own arms, the thing we lacked all these years. This morning, the first delivery of arms and ammunition from General MacArthur has reached us. This, too, will be great help for starter." Colonel Holt's eyes gleamed with the fire of courage and the assurance of victory. He could almost taste it. "We will not fail." He nodded his head. He stood from his chair and walked toward the big map of the town that hung against the wall. "Now that we have all the necessary information, let us once more go over our plan of attack. I need an advance team to clear the end of the tunnel. I mean, break through its opening to the armory. And that's where I need you and your men, Captain." The colonel faced Ernesto, who was sitting on the bench, secretly amused at the colonel's plan. Ernesto had already a better plan in mind. "You start on your mission at 1800 hour. That will give you sufficient time to break through the armory. Have your supper early." Colonel Holt threw Ernesto a confident look. "That won't be necessary anymore, Colonel." Ernesto spoke with authority. The colonel knitted his brows as he stepped closer to Ernesto. "What do you mean by not necessary anymore? I could not risk all our men in entering the tunnel without an advance team clearing it first for them." "An advance team is not necessary, sir. Someone had already volunteered to clear the tunnel for us." "The girl?" Colonel Holt asked incredulously, his mind revolting vehemently against the thought of having to use a young American girl take so much risk again. "No, sir. The girl had already accomplished her job. She will be duly recognized for it. Who then is the volunteer this time?" "The girl's father, sir." "What?" The colonel's eyes reflected shock, disbelief, and anger. "You mean that Japanese?" "Yes, sir. Here is his note." Ernesto turned over the paper with his sketch. Colonel Holt snatched the paper from him, and after throwing a sharp, suspicious look at Ernesto, read the note. His eyes widened and closed with repressed fury. "Do you know what this means, Captain?" He uttered the words between gritted teeth as he looked at Ernesto through the wrinkled lids of his eyes. We are about to launch a major and all-important operation, and you entrusted this Japanese with our plan? He is in a position to help us beyond our expectations. Yes, beyond our expectation, Captain. Colonel Holt ground his words between his teeth with sarcasm and repressed anger. For that Japanese will open up the end of the tunnel where our soldiers will surely meet their death. It would be a massacre, Captain. A total gruesome massacre of our entire unit. The tunnel opened, the guerrillas trapped inside, and the Japanese machine guns rattling to meet them. Have you not thought of this, Captain? I have, sir, but Mr. Miura is a truly sincere and loyal friend. After he refused to help you with the sketch, he now volunteered to clear the tunnel. Through this note, he will help just like that. It is highly suspicious, to say the least, Captain. Bluntly put, he is being used by the Japanese to trap us. Maybe his being a Japanese got to him. That is impossible, not with Mr. Miura. In what way did this Japanese differ from the rest? In the degree of his clever tactics? Oh, they are all the same, Captain, believe me, and I would not risk the lives of my men by trusting a highly suspicious Japanese. We can't postpone the entire operation, sir. General MacArthur's fleet will be coming tomorrow at dawn. I am aware of that, but that is not enough to stampede me to risk my men. This landing could wait for another time if needed. I will send the message right now. Yes, sir, this landing could wait, but the lives of the helpless civilians and the prisoners in that town could not, I'm sure. How about the American prisoners inside the stockade you showed the sketch? Yes, I noticed. Everyone's life is precious. That goes for the guerrillas too. Colonel Holt sounded final. I will not gamble with the lives of my men. The landing must be postponed. He pounded the table with his fist. A gunshot rang and both Colonel Holt and Ernesto rushed out of the hut. A throng of guerrillas were gathered 20 yards away beneath the trees, and many more were converging toward the direction of the crowd. Colonel Holt and Ernesto briskly walked to the scene and hustled their way through the thick crowd. What's the matter? Colonel Holt queried, but his question was left unanswered as they pointed at the body of a Japanese, his arms widely spread on the ground, his legs wide apart, and his back pierced with a bullet hole where blood was still freshly flowing. What's the meaning of this? The colonel faced Lieutenant Duribio. We don't kill our prisoners. He was tied up in the hut, sir, but he managed to escape. The guard shot him. Lieutenant Toribio explained. The Japanese prisoner was entrusted to him earlier. Escape? Colonel Holt became suddenly suspicious, and Ernesto scrutinized every man that had gathered. The guard could not say how it happened, for the prisoner was tied to the post. I was guarding him, sir. Then I heard movement behind the hut, so I stepped out and checked, and when I returned, he was gone. The rope used to tie him was cut. The guard, a middle-aged guerrilla, explained. I am sure he had no weapon to cut the rope. Ernesto's mind grappled with the mystery. He turned over the Japanese and found him to be still alive. Who helped you? Dixon, who was among the crowd, was tense, for he knew that in case that Japanese was forced to talk, his position in the camp was in jeopardy. He was the one who created the movement behind the prisoner's hut, and he was the one who untied the prisoner. He gave him the instruction to alert the Japanese garrison of the impending landing of General MacArthur's fleet, a message he was able to surreptitiously gather. Who helped you? Again, Ernesto's voice rang, but the Japanese coughed his last. Dixon was able to breathe. See me in my office after you are through here, Captain. Colonel Holt spoke and then turned away. Where did he come from? It was Ernesto who asked, for this was the first Japanese they had in their camp. An intruder? No, Captain, Lieutenant Toribio answered. One of my men captured him at the creek at the adjacent village. Alone? Yes, alone. He must have been left behind by the group which rounded up the civilians from their place. Probably taking a bath? No, Captain, he was raping a young girl at the creek. Ernesto stared down at the dead Japanese with a sharp look, then gazed far. His thoughts suddenly flew back to Joyville. The brute, he murmured. Finish your job, Lieutenant Toribio. Ernesto ordered, then turned to follow the colonel. "My men will take charge here, Lieutenant," Dison volunteered. Toribio nodded and thanked him, then walked away, too. Dison immediately bent down and turned to the Japanese, but in the process, he swiftly and surreptitiously picked with his other hand a small sheet of paper in the Japanese pocket. "You deserve this." He turned him over again, then stood up and gave the order to his men to dig a grave for the enemy. Just as soon as Ernesto was about to get into the hut, another commotion erupted. This time a guerrilla arrived carrying a bloody figure, bruised and swollen like before. A crowd immediately gathered. The colonel had also come. "Pedro, you're back." Ernesto was both surprised and alarmed to see Pedro return, for he had asked permission to visit his wife in the town when he heard that she had delivered to their son. And he had not returned since then. For an answer, Pedro frantically moved his arms in a futile attempt to tell them of his horrible experience in the hands of the Japanese at the garrison and his subsequent escape. The sound he produced was incoherent and in warbled syllables. Blood accompanied his every effort to speak. The agony on his face clearly showed the suffering he had undergone. "His tongue had been cut, sir." It was the lookout who explained. "This is awful." The colonel spoke in a bitter tone, just a little beyond a whisper. Pedro was still brandishing his arms, trying to say something about what happened to him. What he had overheard from the Japanese guard when they took him from the garrison to the concentration area at the marketplace, and how he escaped along the way. Ernesto tried to make something out of Pedro's words and his gestures. "Attack? Is that what you are saying?" Again, Ernesto was able to guess the right message. Pedro nodded his head successively. "When? How?" Pedro shook his head. "Tonight?" Again he shook his head and forced the right words out his mouth. "Tomorrow?" Pedro's eyes brightened as he nodded. "But how did they know about this place? We had been successful in keeping the location of this camp a secret." Pedro motioned with his hand as if indicating a square sheet of paper with sketch. "What?" Ernesto was shocked. "They have a sketch of our camp?" Pedro nodded. Pedro went on to uttering syllables and gesturing when suddenly he stopped, dumbfounded as his eyes darted at the direction in disbelief. Ernesto instinctively followed Pedro's sight, but saw nothing except the crowd of guerrillas. What he failed to catch sight of was Dizon, who was able to sneak out of the crowd. Ernesto bent down to listen closely to Pedro, but nothing was audible. "What is it?" Ernesto held Pedro by the shoulders. Pedro tried to mumble as he strained to follow a direction, but his eyes suddenly froze as he gasped and breathed his last. Ernesto put down Pedro's head, stood and walked to the colonel, who motioned him to follow. They were both tense and furious. As soon as they reached the hut, no one dared say anything, both of them thinking of the incident that had befallen Pedro. "Colonel, we need to move tonight. You saw what Pedro relayed to us. The Japanese will attack us tomorrow, and they have a sketch of our camp. We can't wait for them here. We either move out or go ahead with our plan before they get wind of it. We still have an advantage here. They won't reach this camp. We can ambush them on their way here. Going ahead with our plans to get there at the garrison is suicide, and not with the knowledge of the Japanese in town. No, we have to think of a better way. I can't afford to lose my men. That Japanese, sir, is helping us. Let's take the chance if you call it that. But tonight is the time, not later. As a Filipino, I beg of you to attack tonight before it's too late for all the civilians who are encamped in the town and for the many American prisoners in that stockade. I saw the sudden transformation of the town into a mass concentration camp. The town is under martial law now. And just this afternoon, I saw a truckload of dead civilians who took it upon themselves to fight their way out from the concentration area and were massacred. It must have been their feeling of hopelessness that spurred them to resort to such madness. They were all helplessly machine-gunned, and many more could be killed tonight or tomorrow if we delay any further. It's not you alone who wants to save the civilians, and I'm aware of the many POW at the Japanese garrison. Colonel Holt spoke in a low, controlled voice. My concern cannot be less for Filipinos than for the Americans. I saw you stand side by side with us. I saw you fight and die with us. My feeling is no different from that of a Filipino. But in war, it's not one's feelings that should decide, for wars are not won through emotions, but through right judgment and planning. Yes, Colonel, but I assure you Mr. Miura is one Japanese who simply could not do what you suspect him to be capable of doing. And if he does, he will die from my own hands. I assure you that, sir. The colonel was silent, thinking and deliberating what Ernesto had just said. Colonel Holt, this is our biggest opportunity. Someone will break the end of the tunnel for us, a Japanese. If it is the risk of losing many lives which concern you, I will be the first to get in there, and the rest of our men can wait outside. And in case my judgment is wrong, and Mr. Miura is used by the Japanese to trap us, then our entire unit can retreat in safety. You will only be risking me. As Colonel Holt looked at Ernesto, he could see the sincerity and the urgency of his plea. All right, Captain Duran. We will attack tonight. Thank you, sir. The joy and relief of Ernesto was overwhelming. I'll send the message immediately to General MacArthur's headquarters. It's a go for the Fleet's passage tomorrow morning. Give out the order to assemble of the men. See me here after you have done that. Yes, sir. Ernesto wanted to fly out. Colonel Holt found the determination and aggressiveness of Ernesto quite typical of the Filipino zeal and fire, which enabled them to last for almost 3 years in the midst of an almost hopeless battle. The courage and undoubted spirit of fighting as long as an invader tread their land were to Colonel Holt's mind strong Filipino virtues, which were their proud heritage from a noble history of ceaseless struggle for freedom and dignity. After sending the urgent message to General MacArthur's headquarters, giving the all-clear signal for the passage of their landing forces, Colonel Holt buoyantly and spiritedly hurried back to his hut to prepare for the briefing of his officers on their plan of attack. Ernesto, after giving the order to assemble all their men, raced back to Colonel Holt, who stood before the huge map on the wall of his hut. At exactly 1800 hour tonight we start, Colonel Holt began. We should reach this point before 23:30 hour. He pointed the area near the entrance of the tunnel, and from here we wait for the signal to get into the tunnel. Captain Duran, you will enter the tunnel with one platoon. Ernesto was pumped up. Lieutenant Toribio will lead the diversionary unit to this area. The colonel pointed with his stick the vast area fronting the main gate of the bastion. Sergeant Cruz and his men will proceed directly to the concentration building of the civilians in the town, while Sergeant Leon shall take charge of freeing the American and Filipino prisoners at the barracks inside the garrison. Assign a team to take over the gun emplacement facing the sea. The colonel briefed Ernesto with the aid of the map on the wall. The rest of the men will stay with me in this area. He pointed to a point slightly farther from Ernesto's position. We will follow you as soon as everything is cleared. Remember, bows and arrows first should be used by Lieutenant Toribio's and Sergeant Cruz units. Everything should be done to assure a truly surprise attack. Assemble the men. I would like to speak to them after you brief them. As soon as Colonel Holt was alone, loneliness and the heavy burden of responsibility shadowed his face. Whether his decision was based on reason or emotion, nothing else could be done now except to hope and pray for the success of their operation. He had long been in the military, and decisions like this are studied intensely, but he knew he could not just disregard the opinion of an officer like Ernesto. A great difference is he could not decide against the use of Mr. Miura, for his judgment of him was based purely on a general prejudice against an enemy, while Ernesto's was based on a more intimate and personal relationship. The conflict was there, but he had made the decision. He now turned to his desk, then gathered all his papers and put this inside a knapsack He then threw a sad, reminiscing look around his hut, the hut that had become witness to all his decisions, his anxieties and apprehensions, his grief and times of pain, his victories and failures over their many ambush operations, and his beautiful memories of recollections of home. It was the hut that had now become witness to a soldier's hours of seeming helplessness and renewed determination. It could be his last time in this hut that had become his lonely refuge through all the past 3 years of endless misery and struggle. The colonel had now cleared his desk of all his personal effects. He walked toward the door and stood there, scanning around the clearing that had been their camp for years. Ernesto, now in his uniform, stood before the assembled men, more than 100 of them. They have gathered at the clearing facing the 3 exposed sides of the conference hut. At exactly 1800 hour tonight, we start for the town. There was a wave of excitement among the men. Our mission is to clear the passage of General MacArthur's fleet en route to their landing destination. Cheering erupted. That's all for today, to be continued on Tuesdays and Thursdays. May we all forever exhale and inhale love and peace. Thanks for being with me today. I hope you will inspire me with a like, share, and subscribe.